Let me paint you a picture. Imagine this, a sprawling villa in Italy, its ancient stones bathed in the golden light of an endless summer. Inside, two siblings, if you can call us that, navigating the delicate dance of shared history and unspoken truths. That's where I come in. I'm Isolde. Yes, like the opera. My mother was a hopeless romantic. She named me before she met my father, before she knew he'd leave her with nothing but an empty bed and a baby to raise alone. But enough about them, they're not here now. It's just Cassius and I. Cassius. Just saying his name sends shivers down my spine. He's tall, dark-haired, eyes like the stormy sea outside our window. A financier, all sharp suits and sharper words. Me? I'm an artist. Hands stained with paint, headphones drowning out the world. Our parents married when we were adults, their union an afterthought in our lives. Yet here we are, summers melting into each other under the Italian sun. The villa hums with memories, laughter echoing off terracotta floors, ghostly echoes of childhood holidays spent running barefoot through its sprawling halls. Cassius is everywhere, his presence a tangible thing. His voice rumbles like distant thunder, filling rooms, commanding attention. I'm his silent shadow, content to observe from the sidelines, my easel and paints my only companions. But don't let the serene facade fool you. Beneath the surface, something sinister stirs. It's in the way Cassius' gaze lingers on me when he thinks I'm not looking. In the sudden tension that fills a room when our hands brush accidentally. In the unspoken words hanging heavy between us, a silent conversation only we understand. Take today, for instance. He's by the pool, body honed from years of slicing through water with powerful strokes. I watch him from my easel, my eyes tracing the lines of his form instead of the brush in my hand. The air between us throbs with unspoken words, a tension that's been building like a pressure cooker ready to explode. What if it does? What if one day, we can't contain it anymore? That thought sends a thrill of fear and something else, something darker, coursing through me. Because despite everything, there's a part of me that wants to find out what happens next. So here we are, suspended on the precipice of something dangerous, something taboo. Our parents, blissfully unaware, left us to our devices. But maybe they shouldn't have. Maybe they should have seen the undercurrents churning beneath our polite facades. Because this summer might just be the one that changes everything. And as Cassius stands up, water sluicing off his tanned skin, turning towards me with a look in his eyes I can't quite read, well, let's just say I have a feeling we're about to find out why. As Cassius' words hung heavy between us, I felt a flush spread across my cheeks. He didn't hate me, quite the opposite. What did that mean? Before I could ask, he took a step back, breaking our moment of intimacy. I should go, he muttered, turning away and leaving me alone in the pantry with nothing but my whirling thoughts for company. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. We ate dinner together, making small talk about art and finance, anything to avoid the elephant in the room. Yet every time our eyes met, I felt that same jolt of electricity, that unspoken connection pulsating between us. Later, as we watched an old movie on TV, our legs touching casually on the couch, I couldn't help but steal glances at him. His profile was stark against the flickering screen, straight nose, strong jaw, those stormy eyes hidden behind closed lids. He seemed so peaceful, so unaware of the turmoil inside me. I wanted to ask him what he meant earlier. Wanted to demand answers, explanations. But something held me back, fear, perhaps, or maybe just a bone-deep understanding that once we started down this road, there was no turning back. Instead, I let the questions swirl in my mind like a maelstrom, keeping me awake long after Cassius had retired to his room. What did quite the opposite mean? Did he feel it too, this pull, this tension that felt almost physical at times? And if so, why hadn't we acted on it before now? Had we been afraid of ruining our fragile family dynamic? Of crossing a line society deemed taboo? Or was there something else holding us back? Something darker, more dangerous. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at my door. Cassius stood there, silhouetted against the dim hallway light, his expression unreadable. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly, pushing open the door and stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I shook my head, sitting up in bed as he took a seat on the edge, close enough that our knees touched. His hand reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair away from my face. It was such a simple gesture, yet it sent my heart racing. "Me neither," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking about what you asked me earlier." My breath hitched in my throat as I waited for him to continue. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something raw, vulnerable, in the depths of his eyes. "I don't hate you, Isolde," he repeated, his thumb tracing circles on my knee through the thin fabric of my nightgown. "I could never hate you. You're everything to me." My heart pounded against my ribs as realization dawned on me. This was at the moment we'd been dancing around for years. The point of no return. "But..." I started, my voice barely audible. He silenced me with a finger pressed gently to my lips. "No buts," he whispered, his gaze locked onto mine. "Not tonight." And then, slowly, deliberately, he leaned in and kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, a question rather than a statement. But when I responded, when my hands reached up to tangle in his hair, pulling him closer, it deepened, became something more urgent, more desperate. In that moment, everything changed. The tension between us morphed into something else entirely: desire, hot and consuming, burning away the last remnants of our inhibitions. Our clothes fell away easily, barriers cast aside as we explored each other's bodies with eager hands and hungry mouths. There was nothing gentle about it. It was raw, intense, a release years in the making. We didn't just make love, we devoured each other, lost in a dance of give and take, surrender and claim. And when we finally came apart, gasping and sweaty and sated, I knew there was no going back. Because as much as I tried to deny it before, this wasn't just lust. This was something deeper, more profound. This was love, messy, complicated, forbidden love. And once you've tasted it, once you've seen the truth laid bare between two souls intertwined, well, there's no going back. So here we are, Cassius and I, standing on the precipice of a decision that will change our lives forever. Do we give in to this pull, embrace the darkness that's been lurking beneath the surface all along? Or do we fight it, try to maintain the delicate balance of family dynamics at the risk of losing something far more precious? As I lie here beside him now, his arm wrapped protectively around me, I can't help but wonder what tomorrow will bring. Will we face this together, hand in hand, ready to confront whatever storms lie ahead? Or will fear and doubt drive us apart, leaving us both lost at sea? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: whatever happens next, nothing will ever be the same. Not after tonight. As Cassius pulled away, I felt an inexplicable sense of loss wash over me. His hand had been warm against my skin, the contact sending shivers up my spine despite the heat of the day. I wanted to reach out, to pull him back, but something held me in place: fear, perhaps, or maybe just a lingering sense of propriety. He hoisted himself out of the pool, water cascading off his muscular frame. I couldn't help but watch as he reached for a towel, scrubbing it roughly over his face before running it through his dark hair. When he finally looked at me, there was an intensity in his eyes that made my breath hitch. "Come on," he said gruffly, extending a hand towards me. "Let's get out of the sun." I took his hand, allowing him to help me from the pool. His fingers wrapped around mine, squeezing gently as if reassuring me that everything was okay. But it wasn't okay, not really. Because with that simple touch underwater, something had shifted between us, tilting our world ever so slightly off its axis. We settled onto loungers under the shade of an ancient olive tree, our bodies close but not touching. The silence stretched out between us, thick and heavy, with unspoken words. I could feel Cassius' gaze on me, hot and insistent, yet whenever I glanced his way, he looked away quickly, breaking eye contact. "What are you thinking?" I asked finally, unable to bear the tension any longer. He turned to face me then, his expression serious. "I'm thinking." He began slowly, hesitation clear in his voice. I'm thinking that maybe we should talk about what's happening here. My stomach churned nervously at his words. Did he mean us? The electricity between us? Or was he referring to something else entirely? What do you mean? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, running a hand through his wet hair and leaving it disheveled in a way that made him look younger, more vulnerable. I mean this, he said, gesturing between us. This thing, whatever it is. It's getting harder to ignore. My heart pounded against my ribs as I waited for him to continue. He reached out, tracing patterns on the back of my hand with his fingertip, sending shivers up my arm. It started as just a spark, he admitted softly. A tiny little flame that I tried to extinguish every time it flickered to life. But now it feels like a wildfire, Isolde. Raging out of control, threatening to consume us both. His words sent a thrill of fear and excitement coursing through me. He felt it too, this pull, this connection that defied explanation. But we can't, I said weakly, even as every fiber of my being screamed at me to give in, to let the flames lick higher. We shouldn't. He nodded, understanding flashing across his face. I know. God, do I know. But what if just once, we stopped fighting it? What if we gave in, even for a moment? His gaze locked onto mine, pleading and intense. I could see the struggle within him, the battle raging between duty and desire. And as I looked into his eyes, I knew that I was facing the same war. Because despite everything, our families, society's expectations, the very definition of right and wrong, there was a part of me that wanted nothing more than to give in, to lose myself in him completely. Just once, he whispered, leaning closer until his breath fanned across my lips. One moment out of time. That's all I'm asking for. His mouth hovered millimeters from mine, waiting for my response. The world around us faded away, leaving only the two of us suspended in this moment of choice. And then, ever so slowly, I closed the distance between us, pressing my lips to his. He hesitated for a heartbeat before responding, his hand cupping the back of my neck as he deepened the kiss. It was gentle at first, exploratory, like two strangers learning each other's languages. But as our bodies molded together, as our breaths became one, it grew more urgent, more passionate. Tongues clashed, teeth nipped, hands wandered, we devoured each other, lost in a dance of give and take. When we finally pulled apart, gasping for breath, reality came crashing back down around us. We stared at each other, wide-eyed and panting, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavy between us. What have we done? I whispered, horror dawning on me as I realized the magnitude of our actions. Cassius' expression turned bleak. I don't know, he admitted quietly. But there's no going back now. And with those ominous words, I knew that everything had changed irrevocably. We'd crossed a line today, one that could never be uncrossed. And as much as I wanted to take it all back, to pretend like it never happened, I also knew that I wouldn't change it for the world. Because in that moment, pressed against him under the hot Italian sun, I felt alive. More than alive, I felt seen, understood, accepted. And despite the consequences, despite the turmoil and the uncertainty, I wanted nothing more than to feel that way again. So here we are, teetering on the edge of a chasm, our world shattered into a million tiny pieces. Do we try to glue them back together, to salvage what remains of our familial bonds? Or do we embrace this new reality, stepping off the cliff hand in hand, ready to face whatever storms lie ahead? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, nothing will ever be the same again. Not after today. As Cassius' hands explored my body, I arched into his touch, a soft moan escaping my lips. His mouth followed suit, leaving a trail of fire across my skin as he kissed and bit and licked every inch of me. I could feel the hard length of him pressing against my thigh, evidence of his desire for me. Isolde, he groaned, his voice ragged with need. We shouldn't, we can't. But even as he spoke, his hands continued to roam, dipping between my legs to stroke me in just the right way, sending waves of pleasure coursing through me. I gasped, bucking against him, lost in sensation. We can, I panted, my fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. We must. God, Isolde, he gasped against my neck, his breath hot and ragged. You feel, you're. I can't. We lay there for a long time afterward, our limbs entwined, hearts beating in sync, basking in the aftermath of our passion. But eventually, reality began to creep back in, casting long shadows over our momentary bliss. Cassius rolled onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow as he looked down at me, his expression serious. What have we done? He whispered, echoing my earlier thought. I reached up, tracing the lines of his face with my fingertips. We've crossed a line, I admitted softly. One that can't be uncrossed. He closed his eyes briefly, as if steeling himself for what was to come. When he opened them again, there was a steely determination in their depths. Yes, he agreed. But maybe it's time we stopped trying to fight it. Maybe it's time we finally admitted the truth that this thing between us, it isn't going anywhere. My heart swelled at his words, even as fear gnawed at me from within. He was right, there was no denying what had happened tonight. No more pretending it was just a momentary lapse in judgment or a fleeting bout of curiosity. This was real. This was us. And no matter how much we might want to deny it, there was no going back now. So what do we do? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. How do we move forward from here? He took my hand in his, linking our fingers together tightly. Together, he said firmly. Whatever happens next, we face it together. As much as I wanted to believe him, doubt lingered at the edges of my mind. Could we truly defy society's expectations and forge our own path? Or would we eventually crumble under the weight of judgment and disapproval? Only time would tell. But for now, wrapped in Cassius' embrace, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward, one where love conquered all, and nothing could stand in our way. So here we are, standing on the precipice of a new reality, ready or not. Ahead lies uncertainty, turmoil, perhaps even heartache. But behind us is only darkness, emptiness, a void created by years of denying what was right in front of us all along. And so, with Cassius' hand clasped tightly in mine, I take that first tentative step into the unknown, ready to face whatever storms may come our way. Because despite everything, societal norms, familial expectations, even the very definition of right and wrong, one thing remains crystal clear. I love him. And he loves me. And sometimes, that's enough to make all the difference in the world. As I sat across from Cassius at the dinner table that evening, I couldn't help but notice how different everything felt now. The air between us seemed charged with energy, crackling like static before a storm. Our parents, oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around us, chattered on about their day, leaving us to our silent dance of glances and smiles. Cassius' hand brushed mine as he reached for the wine bottle, sending a jolt of electricity up my arm. He looked at me then, his stormy eyes filled with unspoken words, and I felt my heart race in response. It was as if we were trapped in some alternate universe where nothing existed but us, our secret lingering heavy between us. Yet even as I reveled in this newfound intimacy, guilt clawed at me from within. We'd done something forbidden last night, something that went against every societal norm and familial expectation. And while part of me thrilled at the illicit nature of it all, another part recoiled in horror at what we'd become. I caught Cassius watching me intently when our parents left the room to retrieve dessert. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly, his voice barely audible above the hum of conversation in the next room. I hesitated, searching for the right words. How could I possibly explain the whirlwind of emotions raging inside me? The exhilaration and the terror, the love and the shame? "I'm thinking," I began slowly, my gaze flicking down to where our hands rested side by side on the tablecloth. "I'm thinking that maybe we shouldn't have done it." His expression darkened, hurt flashing across his face, before he quickly masked it with indifference. "Oh," he said stiffly, pulling away slightly. "I see. No. I exclaimed, reaching out to grasp his hand tightly. That's not what I meant. I mean, yes, it happened, and it was incredible, but now everything feels so complicated. I don't know how to navigate this, Cassius, how to balance what we did with who we are. He looked at me then, really looked at me, seeing the turmoil within me reflected in my eyes. And when he spoke, his voice was gentle, understanding. I know, he said quietly. It's confusing, isn't it? But we'll figure it out together, Isolde. We'll take it one step at a time and see where this path leads us. His words calmed me somewhat, allowing me to breathe easier as our parents returned with plates of tiramisu. We ate in silence for a while, lost in our own thoughts, before Cassius spoke up again. Remember when we were kids, he said suddenly, breaking into my swirling thoughts, and we used to spend hours exploring the woods behind the house? We'd follow these tiny paths, never knowing where they'd lead us, but always trusting that somehow, someway, they'd bring us home. I nodded, smiling at the memory. We had so many adventures, I agreed. Exactly, he said, his gaze locking onto mine. And maybe that's what this is, an adventure. A path we never expected to take, but one that could lead us somewhere amazing if only we're brave enough to follow it. His words resonated deep within me, striking a chord of truth that echoed through my soul. Perhaps he was right, perhaps this was our adventure, one filled with uncertainty and fear, yes, but also possibility and promise. So as I finished my dessert and pushed back my chair, ready to face whatever came next, I made a conscious decision to embrace the unknown. To trust in Cassius and in us, and to see where this path would lead us. Because despite everything, the guilt, the shame, the fear of judgment from others, there was one thing I knew for certain, I loved him. And sometimes, love was worth fighting for, no matter where it took you. And so, with Cassius' hand clasped tightly in mine, we stepped forward into the darkness, ready to face whatever adventures awaited us on this winding, twisting path called life. The villa's dining room seemed smaller somehow, the walls closing in around us as we sat down to dinner together. Our parents chattered on about their trip, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface of our forced smiles and polite nods. Cassius' leg pressed against mine under the table, his hand resting casually on my thigh, a silent reassurance that we were in this together. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Mom, Dad, Cassius began once the plates had been cleared away and coffee poured. His voice was steady, confident, belying the tension I could feel radiating from him. There's something, Isolde, and I need to tell you. Our parents exchanged curious glances, before turning their attention back to us, expectation hanging heavy in the air. We've been seeing each other, Cassius continued, his thumb tracing patterns on my skin beneath the tablecloth. Romantically. Silence descended like a shroud, wrapping itself around us as our parents processed this bombshell revelation. It was as if time had frozen, each second stretching into infinity as we awaited their reaction. Finally, my mother spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. What do you mean, seeing each other? Cassius looked at me then, silently asking permission to reveal all. I nodded infinitesimally, giving him the green light. It started recently, he admitted, his gaze flickering between our parents and me. We tried to fight it, believe me, but we can't deny what's happening between us anymore. And what exactly is happening between you? My father demanded, his voice like thunder as he leaned forward in his chair. This is unnatural. Incestuous. Dad. I exclaimed, recoiling at the harshness of his words. It's not like that, we're not related by blood. We might as well be, he retorted, slamming his fist on the table, causing the crystal glasses to rattle precariously. You grew up together, for God's sake. This is sick. His words stung, but they also lit a fire within me, one that refused to be extinguished by fear or shame. Love isn't always neat and tidy, I said firmly, meeting his angry gaze with defiance of my own. It doesn't follow rules or societal expectations. Sometimes, it crosses lines, shatters boundaries, leaves chaos in its wake. And sometimes, Cassius added softly but no less forcefully, it brings people together who were meant to be united from the very beginning. Our parents stared at us then, their expressions a mix of shock, disgust, and disbelief. It was clear they hadn't expected this, hadn't expected us to stand up for ourselves, for our love, in the face of their disapproval. "We won't have it," my father growled eventually, breaking the tense silence. This unnatural union ends now. You will stop seeing each other immediately." Cassius' hand tightened around mine beneath the table, his knuckles turning white with tension. But when he spoke, his voice was calm, steady. "I'm afraid we can't do that," he said quietly but firmly. "We love each other, Dad. And no matter how much you might disapprove, nothing will change that." Our mother stood up abruptly then, her chair scraping loudly against the tiled floor. "I won't listen to this," she cried out, pressing a hand to her forehead as if physically pained by our words. It's sickening." With that, she stormed out of the room, leaving us in stunned silence. My father followed soon after, casting one last disapproving glance our way before disappearing into his study. As their footsteps faded away upstairs, Cassius turned to me, his expression filled with a mix of trepidation and hope. "So," he said softly, "it's just you and me now." I nodded, taking a deep breath as I let the full weight of our decision settle upon my shoulders. We'd done it, we'd laid bare our truth, and faced the consequences head-on. But even as relief washed over me, so too did fear of what came next, fear of being cast out by those who should love us unconditionally. Fear of facing a future filled with uncertainty and struggle. Yet amidst that storm of emotion, one thing remained crystal clear: I loved Cassius. And he loved me. And sometimes, love was worth fighting for, no matter the cost. So as we stood there, hand in hand, ready to face whatever trials lay ahead, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that we'd made the right choice. Because true love, messy, complicated, forbidden though it may be, was always worth fighting for. Even if it meant sacrificing everything else along the way. I sit by the window now, the sea stretching out before me like a canvas, waiting for my touch. The villa seems smaller somehow, its walls closing in around me as I wait for Cassius to return from his latest business trip. The years have softened the edges of our love story, rounding off the sharp corners of passion and pain into something more nuanced, more profound. Yet even now, amidst the quiet comfort of our life together, I find myself looking back on that fateful summer, the one where everything changed forever. I remember the way Cassius' hand felt in mine as we stood before our parents, ready to face their wrath for loving each other. The fear that gripped my heart like a vice as we waited for their reaction. The relief that washed over me when we finally decided to fight for ourselves, for our love, no matter the cost. But most of all, I remember the look in Cassius' eyes that night, the raw vulnerability, the fierce determination, the unspoken promise that together, we could face anything. And as I stare out at the restless sea below, I can't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, our parents might have seen that too. A sudden knock at the door jars me from my reverie. I stand up, smoothing down my dress, a habit born of years spent preparing for unexpected visitors. But when I open the door, there's no one there. Confused, I step outside onto the balcony, following the sound of soft crying to the edge. And there he is, Cassius, his back turned towards me, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Cassius?" I ask tentatively, laying a hand on his arm. He turns to face me then, his eyes red and raw, cheeks streaked with tears. In his hands, he holds an old photograph, one of our parents, smiling and carefree, taken long before their disapproval tore us apart. "I found this," he chokes out, turning the picture towards me. "In my father's things." I take it from him, tracing the edges of the faded image with my fingertips. It's a photo I haven't seen in years, one snapped during happier times, when our families were still whole, still united. I think he knew," Cassius whispers, his voice hoarse with emotion. "About us. About what we did that summer." My breath catches in my throat as realization dawns on me. Could it be true? Did our parents, or at least Cassius' father, somehow see beyond the taboo, past the societal norms they held so dear, to understand the truth of our love? He must have, Cassius continues, his voice gaining strength. Why else would he keep this hidden away all these years? As I look into his eyes, I see something there, a spark, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we weren't so wrong after all. Maybe our parents could have understood if we'd only given them the chance. So what do we do now? I ask softly, my heart pounding in my chest as I consider the implications of this revelation. Cassius takes the photograph from me, tucking it safely into his pocket before taking both of my hands in his. We fight, he says firmly. For them. For us. For everything we've lost and everything we still have to gain. And as we stand there together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever battles lie ahead, I know without a shadow of doubt that this is the moment where our story truly begins. Because love isn't always easy, or neat, or tidy. Sometimes, it's messy and complicated and heartbreakingly beautiful. And sometimes, if you're lucky, just sometimes, it's worth fighting for. So here's to you, dear reader, the end of our tale, but just the beginning of ours. We'd love to hear your thoughts on our journey in the comments below. What choices would you have made? What lessons did you take away from our story? And most importantly, what does love mean to you?